Welcome into Lesson 6. Lesson 6 is on dots and ties. So these are ways to increase the duration of a note. All right, so a dot increases a note's value by half of that note's duration. So if we think of a half note is made up of 2 quarter notes. So half the value of a half note is 1 quarter note. So if we add a dot to a half note, it increases it by half of its value. So we get 3 beats. So let's look at that in a different way. So we have a half note plus half of its value, which is the length of a quarter note, 3 beats. Look at it another way. If we can break that down, quarter note, plus half the value, 3 beats. So if we look at that in a measure of 4/4, typically that's 2 beats. But if we add a dot, now that gets 3 beats. And maybe we want to put another quarter note on beat 4. So that will be 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And that works the same way for all of our notes. It just, the subdivisions keep going down. So let's take a quarter note, for example. So a quarter note is made up of 2 eighth notes. So half the value of a quarter note is 1 eighth note. So if we add a dot to that, that equals 3 eighth notes. Or we could think about it like this, a quarter note plus an eighth note. But that's still 3 beats, 3 beats. So a typical way you might see that is a quarter note, dotted quarter note, and then an eighth note. So let's get rid of that because we're not in 2/4, we're in 4/4. So count the eighth notes. There's 3 of them, 1, 2, 3. So 1 and 2 and. So we have 1 and 2 and. Very common rhythm that we see a lot of the time. Let's do that again, this time with an eighth note. So half the value of an eighth note is 1 16th note. So if we add that dot to that, that's equivalent to 3 16th notes. Or another way to think about that, we have an eighth note plus 1 16th. So remember there's 2 16ths there, plus the third equals 3 16th notes. Now how we typically see that written, a dotted eighth note to a 16th note. So now we're counting in 16th notes, so that would be 1 E and a. And there are beats. So 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 1. Okay? Common rhythm you hear a lot in sambas for maybe like a bass drum part. Boom, 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 boom. They're all over the place. Moving on to ties. Ties are another way to lengthen the duration. Ties combine the duration of 2 or more notes. Ties and stems are always placed on the opposite side of the note head. And just to be clear, rests cannot be tied together. So let's take a look at this. So if we look back at our dot, that equals 1.5 beats. Another way to write that, quarter note, eighth note, tie those together. Still 1.5 beats. Another way we could do that, let's break that down even further. 1, 2, 3. So if we're tying multiple notes together, that still equals 1.5 beats. You usually don't see this. You can, but these two will be the more common ways to see that. Taking a look at dotted half notes, that's getting 3 beats with the dot. Or we could tie that to a quarter note, but that's still getting 3 beats. Just a different way to write. Again, similar to our eighth notes, let's tie those 3 quarter notes together. And again, those all still equal 3 beats. Looking at example 3, notate the following rhythms using dotted note values instead of ties. Do not change the duration or the beat on which any note begins. All right, so we have to change these from ties to dots. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 3 beats right there. So our quarter note's not going to change. And we need 3 beats, so a half note gets 2 beats. Let's add a dot, 3 beats right there. Okay, next up, our first beat's not going to change. We still have that. And then we need 3 eighth notes. So what equals 3 eighth notes? There we go. Okay, and remember, if you get stuck with anything, the answer for every question is in the back of the book. Now, use that as a reference tool, as something to study with. If you're unfamiliar with something, you're just not getting it, just check in the back of the book. All right, I hope this helped. We'll see you in class.